Hi, my name is Beth Bye. I'm State Senator from the 5th District, and welcome to By the By. With me today is Tom Moore, who's Assistant Superintendent of Schools in West Hartford. Tom, great to have you.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, have you at our Capitol. I spend a lot of time in your building,
Absolutely.
But it's nice to have you here.
It's nice to switch places a little bit. Yeah.
So, Tom, you're the incoming superintendent next fall, and I know you have a very busy job now and have been part of the leadership team for a number of years, but some of the viewers might not know your background in the West Hartford Public Schools. Can you just tell us a little bit about your experience?
Sure. I'm really looking forward to July 1st. It seems so far away. I know it gets closer. It'll be probably a little more nerve-wracking. But I started in West Hartford really just about 20 years ago now. In '95, I did my student teaching at Hall High School. I had actually majored in history and Soviet studies while I was in college. And then, you know, the fall of the Soviet Union kind of made my expertise on the Politburo seem a little bit superfluous. So after a couple years, decided to go into teaching. I had coached, and my wife was from Connecticut. We met in college, so I ended up moving to Connecticut when we got married. Got placed at Hall for my student teaching with Ray Sweetland, a great legendary teacher in town. And you know, the moment I started teaching, it was just, this is what I should be doing. I loved every minute of every day in the classroom, and having an impact on kids, it was just tremendous. And then I was fortunate enough to get a part-time position at Conard my first year, actually. So I worked part-time, which at the beginning it was, you would have preferred a full-time position, obviously, but it gave me a chance to get involved in a lot of student activities because I had the time during the day. It allowed me to coach.
What did you coach?
I coached football, and then I coached baseball, and I also coached girls lacrosse.
Okay.
I actually did my MA thesis in history on the impact of Title IX on participation in sports by race by females over the past 40 years in West Hartford.
Oh, wow.
And so once I had written about that experience, I decided it would be a neat experience to coach females too, having coached males my whole life, and to see the difference with the high school female athlete. And it was one of the great experiences of my life, and really prepared me to have my daughter, who's now in 6th grade, and helped me to see her in a different setting. And so I taught at Conard, taught history, taught 7 different subjects in history. Anytime there was an extra course hanging out, I always wanted to teach. There was always something new and exciting, and just made great relationships with kids.
Some of them still talk about you.
Well,
you definitely have a following.
Don't believe all that they say.
They say all good things.
And then decided to move into administration. The opportunity came for department supervisor for the history and social studies department at Conard and Sedgwick Middle School. Did that for 2 years, and then Chuck Landrosch announced he was retiring as principal, and it wasn't really a career path that I had thought about. And I think this is something interesting, that people think they know me, they've met me, they know I have a history background. I think they think there's this great ambition, and I tell people it's just been kind of, jobs have opened, and I've thought, I can do that, and I know what's needed here.
And you know, I have that same feeling. People say, oh, you always wanted to be a senator. Not at all.
Exactly.
Things open up, and you see what your passion is, and you think, where can I make the biggest difference? And I think that's what you've done. So you were department supervisor.
Yep, and then principal for 3 years, and this is now my 4th year as assistant superintendent.
Oh, wow.
People ask if I miss the principalship more, if I miss. Teaching's what I miss more. You know, it's funny, as you move into different positions, and I never like to say moving up, because it's just different. We're all serving kids, no matter where it is. And people think these jobs are more about ego. And the truth is, nothing made me feel better than teaching about ego. People listening, people, you know, I say to people sometimes, you know, people used to love me here.
Right.
Because you have the kids and you have that bond. But, you know, now you see with 10,000 kids, the kind of differences you can make. And what are you going to stand for? And what do you represent that you'll fight for your kids?
You know, Tom, one of the things about you that I've always admired is how you really believe deeply that all kids can succeed and that all kids should be given opportunities. Where does that come from with you? You know, because West Hartford has a
Yeah.
unique system that you've really helped emphasize. So talk about yourself and then talk about what's different about West Hartford.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe I've had a chip on my shoulder my whole life, being the youngest of 7 and the only one that went to college.
Wow.
And being from a family that's in construction, my brothers and sisters are all successful, wonderful people, but not from education. And so I've always felt the need kind of to prove myself. I'm just as smart as you.
Right.
I had different experiences and different opportunities. And so really, though, the one quick story that kind of opened my eyes, because one of the things during the time I was at Conner was known for is trying to remove barriers from advanced placement courses.
Exactly.
And I always try to tell people, it's not about advanced placement courses, it's about challenging yourself.
Exactly.
That could just as much mean that my daughter should take an auto tech course. You know, it's pushing yourself to somewhere that you didn't think before you were going to be the one that could do that. And I had one of my best friends was a football coach and had a student that was labeled socially, emotionally maladjusted and in a self-contained program all day and had 8th period free. And he said to me, he's a great history student. He loves reading history. And so my friend taught him all the first 7 periods. And he said, you should take him in your AP European History course. And I said to my friend, Paul, you don't understand. This is rigorous. This is all this reading, this is writing. And he said to me, if you were as good a teacher as everybody thinks you are, you could teach him because he wants to learn. And so I took him in the class. And there was a lot of different things that we had to work on. And, you know, his writing wasn't where other people's were. And we worked throughout the year on that. And there were things that I had to change in the way I taught. But what I saw was this desire for him. He'd read anything I'd give him.
Wow.
It might take him a little longer, but he'd watch anything I'd give him. And there were struggles at times, there's no doubt, and there was a frustration point. But if somebody really wants to learn something, I'm going to be the person that tells them no. That goes against democracy.
Right.
That goes against what we stand for. And plus, I always say to people, it's European history. It's not like in AP European history the Nazis win. I mean, there's an element of we're reading, we're talking about people. This is the preparation for learning history is living a life. And so that kind of opened my eyes to, why are we keeping kids out? We should be pulling people in. And, you know, I'm not going to be the one that tells a kid they can't do something.
And so he passed your class?
Yeah,
and
he did. Yeah, passed the AP exam, passed the national exam.
Wow.
Which was his score was higher than the national average. And actually works as a chef now.
And that's great. It's such a great story because, you know, in another district, that kid might have been self-contained.
Absolutely.
And was self-contained a lot of the day.
Yep.
But I think stories like that and more like them in West Hartford have really added to the push to make all kids push themselves and allow all students to try.
Exactly.
And I think it's a hallmark of the district that's really lifted our high schools. And I know when you were at Conard, I'm married to a teacher who you supervised,
Yep.
and you really pushed them to think about what could they do to help kids succeed at a higher level. And that's why it's so exciting to see you moving into the role you're moving into. I think that Dr. List is really into challenging all students and having them challenge themselves, but you've sort of grown up on this.
Yeah, it's in my blood, it's in the DNA of kind of who I am. This is everything that's succeeded is because of my belief in relationships. And having enough of a relationship with a child so that I can ask them and let them know, hey, I believe in you. Because once we started expanding it, we didn't wait to be asked. Paul Vicenius, who's now the director of secondary education, was my assistant principal. We started looking at scores of 8th graders coming into the school that weren't recommended for honors and saying, I think we can move these 30 kids up. And so we called their parents during the summer and said, you know what, maybe you should try this course. It's more challenging, but we think you can do it. And, you know, that kept, so much of it is just telling somebody, hey, we believe you can do this. And so that's a philosophy I want everybody to have. It doesn't matter if it's kindergarten, 3rd grade, 9th grade, 12th grade, pre-K. Hey, you can do it. You know, that's what public education's all about.
Right. Right. So that's great because it really gives us a sense of where it all comes from. Now, looking ahead, What do you see as sort of the biggest change and opportunity as you look toward your time as superintendent that'll be hitting you in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it goes to opportunity and the notion of sometimes I think we get involved in a little bit of the white noise that's out there. And this pressure and that pressure and pressure for jobs certainly exists. Pressure to compete internationally certainly exists. But one of the pressures that I really want us to always be addressing is emotional well-being of our kids. And, there's no happiness metric, but maybe there should be, and satisfaction in life as we prepare kids for a life in college, a life in the military, a life in the work world, not preparing workers, preparing people. We need to realize we're preparing people to be parents. We're preparing people to be brothers and sisters. We're preparing them to be friends, and we're preparing them to be active citizens. And going back to the roots of the word about what it means to live for each other, right, and pull each other up. So there's so many things around that topic.
Well, it's really interesting because the two themes come together because you're talking about students challenging themselves, but also students having an emotional balance. And I think that's a struggle of a school system is you want kids to have challenge and you want them to be satisfied and curious and want to keep learning. And I think that's why people are so excited about you coming in as superintendent, because I think those are two of the hallmarks of great schools, and two things that make West Hartford such a great district, even with such economic diversity in town. Students from all economic levels are succeeding in many cases. The schools are such a critical part of our town. So I want to thank you so much for coming in today. I wish you such great luck, and we're so lucky to have you.
Well, thanks. We feel lucky to have you, and I know your support of the schools, and it's just a great place, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Great. Thanks for coming in. Welcome back to another segment of By the By. With me right now is Representative Mae Flexer. Welcome, Mae.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mae has been a real leader in the state of Connecticut on the issue of sexual assault. And with the sexual assault on college campuses hearing that we had, and we had a press conference where all the women in the legislature signed off on the beginnings of a bill about how to have an appropriate response when there's a sexual assault on a college campus. So I thought it'd be a really good idea for, the listening public to hear about both, what's happening now, what does this bill improve, and what are some steps that parents can do with their children to raise awareness about these issues, both boys and girls. So let's just start with the bill that we're talking about. What's it trying to do, the improved bill?
Well, I think that the bill that, as you pointed out, I'm so proud to say that every woman in the Connecticut General Assembly has announced their support for, is building on a system that somewhat exists, but needs to be strengthened and improved. It's going to make sure that at every college campus throughout our state, public or private, 2-year or 4-year, there's a plan in place with how to respond appropriately to sexual assault and how to prevent those assaults from occurring on our campuses.
Yeah, I think what's hard to understand, even as a policymaker, is the trauma that young women go through or young men go through. And it's like, well, why don't they just go to the police, or why don't they just do this and that? So can you talk us through what would be an appropriate response on a campus in your mind?
Well, I think the most important thing for a campus to do when a victim is coming forward is to make sure that that victim has lots of options on where to report to. Usually a victim is going to come forward over time and tell a person they're already close to. So they're not going to just walk into the police cold, if you will. They're going to tell their roommate, they're going to tell their RA, they're going to tell their coach, they're going to tell someone they already have a close relationship with and disclose that information. What we need to do is make sure that people in positions like RAs, people like coaches, are trained to know how they should appropriately respond, to make sure that victim knows all the resources that are available to her and knows how to move forward if she wishes.
Yeah, and a bill that we passed in 2012 when I was chair of higher ed really set up training on campuses for students and for staff. But it seems like we need to take that a little further and have even more resources available. One of the parts of the proposed bill makes colleges have memorandums of understanding with nonprofit groups, sexual assault crisis centers in their region, so that if the young woman or young man feels more comfortable going there, that's an option. So do you think that's an important feature of the bill?
I do think that's a really important feature of the bill. And let me just say that, in my opinion, we wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for the brave students from UConn who came forward and told their stories in a way that I think was absolutely courageous. And hopefully, because of their bravery, we're going to be taking serious steps to reduce the number of sexual assaults that happen on college campuses in our state. But making sure those relationships exist so that a victim can go to a sexual assault crisis service center, I think, is critical. I know that at the University of Connecticut, for example, they do have that relationship, but I don't know that every victim fully understands what that resource really is at the crisis service center, and how that person that they're working with is a victim advocate who is there just for them. Unlike many other people in either the campus judicial process or a police investigation through that process, the victim advocate from a sexual assault crisis service center is really there to work with the victim and make sure their interests are being best represented. And I think that's critical.
And the other thing that I really learned through our last public hearing, and then like you, I heard from many victims over the past couple months, sadly, who've suffered through this. And one of the things that I really learned from the victims is that they want control. That they don't want it to be that every case is reported to the police, because maybe that's not where they are, that they want to have control over how it goes, and that actually, control's been taken away from them in the assaults, so that part's important, yet you still want to make sure that something becomes of this, or that perpetrators, at some level, the campus is keeping track of perpetrators. So how do you walk that fine line?
Well, that's a really good question. And the point that you make about the victim getting some sense of control back is really important. And that's why designing a system that has lots of different options for a victim is so critical, because then he or she is in control and she can decide how to move forward. And then in terms of balancing the rights of the alleged perpetrators, I think it's really important that our universities and colleges look at the perpetrators very carefully. The University of Connecticut just a couple of weeks ago had a nationally renowned expert on sexual assault at their campus, David Lisak, and he really gave me a new perspective on who these perpetrators are. I mean, the fact of the matter is most men don't rape. And really it's about 7% of a college campus population that are these perpetrators. And so if you've got victims that are coming forward and a university that's taking those reports seriously, I think over time you could start to identify who these perpetrators are, and they can really do something to step in and prevent them from attacking again, because even though they are a small percentage of the population, these offenders will have 6 or 7 or 8 victims. And so if you can catch them, you know, earlier in their crimes, maybe something can be done to stop them from committing more.
The other thing you hear a lot is the involvement of alcohol when there are these assaults. Is there something we should be doing about that problem, or do you think we need to just take that separate and in this case make sure people are trained and do what we can on the sexual assault? How do we manage that?
Well, I think, you know, the issue of alcohol in our society in general is a complicated one. The issue of sexuality in our society is a complicated one. And one of the other things that David Lisak, the expert I was mentioning earlier, talked about at that presentation was that alcohol sort of becomes an excuse on a college campus setting, but it really isn't the only determinant. Alcohol is a tool that these perpetrators use. But if we eradicate the use of alcohol at these college campuses, he said, these perpetrators are still going to exist. They're going to find other methods to get into a situation where they can still attack people. It might take a little more effort on their parts, but they're still going to be out there sexually assaulting people, unfortunately.
That is a really interesting point. As I understand it, UConn had that set up before all of this
yes, they did.
Trouble came up, that it's something that they were concerned about as a campus and working on. And not to minimize the victims, because those victims and others, I talked personally to a couple of victims who weren't even those who brought the suits. It is so difficult for these young women to tell their stories, whatever the forum. And I think that what we tried to do when we did the original legislation was set up a system so they weren't having to tell their story so many times. Right. And so what do you think is going to change if we are able to pass this bill, or what else should be in this bill to try to help these young women from not being re-traumatized by having to keep telling their story again and again?
Well, I think a lot could change if we pass this legislation. And I think that making sure, knowing if these universities and colleges know that they're being held accountable by the Connecticut General Assembly, I do think that's going to make a difference. The notion that they're going to have to annually report what their plans are, they're going to have to report back to us when they develop these sexual assault response teams, and making sure that they are establishing a community that takes these crimes seriously, I think that's going to make pretty dramatic improvements.
It seems like you've certainly gone out of your way to educate yourself on these issues, and I know since you've been here, how many years have you been a representative?
5 years.
So 5 years. You've been working on these issues as long as you've been here, and I think the Higher Ed Committee is going to look to you for guidance on these bills. And I know you and I are on appropriations. Many things make their way
yes.
to us where there's another place to put a stamp on it. So what other committees are you on, Mae?
I serve on, as you said, the Appropriations Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and Planning and Development.
Okay, and the Judiciary Committee is another place that these sorts of bills go through.
Yes.
And a lot of times I think the public says, oh, you know, we can't legislate everything. We can't really, you know, how do we stop this? And I think I've certainly felt over the past week watching so many legislators come forward, and I should say the men in the building are tremendously supportive. Senator Williams, Looney, I know Representative Sharkey and Arasimowicz were supportive, and certainly Senator Cassano's been supportive. So it seems very uniform. So we really believe there are some steps we can take around training, awareness, and also simplifying it for students. Because when we had the hearings, and you know, the universities came in with binders like this, it was like, if you were a victim and you're traumatized, what are you going to do? So the bill also calls for a very simplified, sort of one-page what are my options? And I think that's important. So I want to make sure I thank you for your leadership on these issues. I think there are probably hundreds of young women in Connecticut that are going to benefit. And we're going to keep tracking this bill. So we may have you back to hear at the end of session how it all went.
That would be great.
Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, viewers, for joining us. And we'll see you next month on By the By.